Hey, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to talk about 6 best practices for building AI automation that no one talks about. So if you're building AI automations using platforms like Zapier, you are probably using tools like ChatGPT or Claude. And to be able to use AI in your automation, you always need to connect your AI accounts through an API key in your Zapier account. So the first tip is about security. When you are creating your new API key in either OpenAI or Claude, make sure to not share that API key with anyone, because if you do and somehow your API key is leaked, someone can use that API key for their automations and you'll probably get billed for it. And also it's a good idea to actually name your API key based on what are you creating it for, and you can track the cost of those AI automations. It's usually a good practice to check your costs on your API console, either on Anthropic for Claude or ChatGPT, just to make sure you know how much you're spending every quarter. Even if you're running 100 automations every month, it's probably gonna be somewhere between $5 and $15. So it's usually not much, but again, it depends on how much context, how many words that are being produced or used by AI in that automation. So again, this cost could vary a lot. But yeah, keep an eye on this cost and make sure your AI accounts do not run out of funds. So you can probably set an auto payment, because in case they run out of funds, your AI automations will stop. So if you don't want any blockers or errors in your automations, just make sure your account is always funded. All right, moving on to the next one. If you do have a whole bunch of automations, like in my case, I have over 100 automations, it's gonna get chaotic. So when you're trying to look for an automation, maybe to see what was the last run for, or you want to make changes, it's gonna be harder to organize and manage. Maybe you have multiple teams and they're all maintaining and building their own automations. The quick tip here is to add folders and move all your automations to those respective folders, so your whole workspace looks cleaner. It's just easier to work with and makes things a lot more seamless in case there are any errors. Speaking of errors, did you know if you go to your Zapier history, you're gonna see all the automations that have run in the past. You can filter them by the time frame, but look for specific automations that actually did not run. So it's a good practice to just have a quick glance once in a while to see if there's any automations that you expected them to run but they actually did not run. So that way you can just go into the automation, you can just ask the AI to help you troubleshoot, or just follow the step-by-step guide which the Zapier platform is going to show you in terms of what is the error and how you can fix it. For the most part, every time there's an automation that is running into an issue, you will get an email that something did not run. So that could be flagged right away and you can take action as soon as possible. So just also make sure that those notifications by emails are enabled so you are up to date in case any automation fails for whatever reason. All right, so next one is about the automations you may have built before, but you don't really use them anymore. So I think it's a good practice that, every quarter or so, you go onto your Zapier account and you look at all the different connections you have. You're connected to Airtable, Gmail, your Notions, your Slack, your CRMs like Salesforce. Look at all the connections that you have. And if there is something that you don't use anymore, maybe in this case, Gumroad, that was something I was working on 2 years ago. I don't use Gumroad anymore. Just for keeping everything clean, just go ahead and delete those connections. And if you ever need those connections again, when you're building a new automation, you can just connect it back. This is just a good practice to make sure your workplace is clean. It's not gonna have any impact on any of your current or previous automations whatsoever. All right, next one is about version control. So let's say, you do have an automation and you wanna make a change now. Let's say this automation where I add a video to my Google Drive folder and it turns into a blog automatically. And now maybe I wanna add paths. Maybe if there's something for Instagram, or maybe something's coming from TikTok or a webinar or whatnot. I just wanna handle multiple events now and I'm gonna make those changes in my automation. So make sure you do version control. So basically work with your team, figure out what is the best way you wanna have a naming convention for all the versions for your Zapier automations and just add that to that name. The reason you want to do that is because maybe circumstances will change. You might want to go back to the previous versions of your automation. Maybe the current one isn't working anymore and you want to go back to a version from 6 months ago and make changes to that. So once you have version control with a good naming, you will know exactly what version was doing what sort of automation. So it's easier for you to go back and work with the version you wanted to work with and make those changes accordingly. Next one is kind of my personal favorite. So when you are building automations, you should start thinking about different edge case scenarios. Here's an example. Let's say I have an automation where basically my voice note turns into an invoice. So add a voice note, AI does its thing, and now it's going to create the invoice in my accounting software. But I got to think about those edge cases. So one of the edge cases is that maybe some information is missing. Maybe in my voice note, I forgot to mention who the customer is, or maybe I forgot to mention what's the amount for the invoice. So in that scenario, I don't want my automation to fail. I want to get notified as soon as possible so I can jump on it, I can deal with it, and not have things slip through the cracks. So here, what I like doing is always work with multiple paths, 2 different paths to handle 2 different tax code. But I have another path where in case some critical information is missing in my voice note, I'm sending myself a Slack message letting me know that, something was missed and this automation is not gonna run. I mean, if you don't do that, you're probably gonna get an alert that your automation failed, but this is much better. Now my automation isn't failing. I just missed some information, and now I can like either recreate a voice note or I can just do that stuff manually. But that way I'm handling my task a lot more comprehensively, and I'll make sure that all my automations and my systems are running bug-free. So these were some of the best practices which I think everyone should know if they're building AI automations. Let me know in the comments if there's something else that I missed in the video. If not, I wish you the best to build more AI automations to help you scale up in the new year.